The strategy that I am about to introduce you to comes directly from the field of linguistics. It is sometimes referred to as phrase markers, at other times syntax trees. I call it simply sentence trees, as that's what they are, trees, diagrams or graphic organizers showing interrelationships between different parts of speech and parts of sentence, and how individual words, when combined into phrases, build up entire sentences. If you learn a new language, being presented with sentences like "a magnet creates an invisible area of magnetism all around it called a magnetic field," or "he was the leader of the Nazi party and became a powerful dictator," is akin to being submerged in water without having the ability to swim. It's too much and too quickly. We need to be able to break this language down for our learners to manageable chunks. Sentence trees look like this. I decided to teach this to my learners because quite a few of them seem to struggle with the idea of subjects, verbs, or objects being more than just one word. In this example here, Gerald is indeed one word, and it is also a subject, but of course, gorgeous Gerald would make a subject, and so would gorgeous Gerald with a moustache. I thought showing to the students what words actually make up subjects, more on that later, would allow them a way in. I was right. It worked like a charm, including in ways I thought were amazing and unpredictable. First, children need letter codes so that they know what to put on the trees. This means that as a teacher, you need to know the sentences you would use with them first. A list of parts of speech and parts of sentence needs to be made. In my case, I translated these into my learners' languages to be 100% certain they know what these are. All the learners in my group are first language literate and received full schooling in their countries of origin, so using the first language is simply drawing on their prior knowledge. I provided my learners with a sheet with examples of the different terms so that they could refer to it later. This was particularly important in terms of the articles "a", "n", "the", which do not exist in any of the languages that the learners in my class speak. So it's not something they would naturally think of. Back to the first sentence. First, we need to stress to the learners that there are two levels of these sentences and that we are going to assign one term to each individual word in the sentence. Therefore, Gerald is a noun, has is a verb, a is an article, and ring is a noun again. Now, we can say that Gerald is a subject. This is who or what the sentence is about. We stress that this time it's just one noun that is a subject. The same goes for has, which is a verb, now treated as part of a sentence rather than of speech. And finally, this is where the students start realizing that parts of speech can be composed of more than one word. A and ring form the sentence's object. You will need to explain to the students the concept of an object linked to the verb. It answers the question of what or who about the verb. In our case here, Gerald has what. It is really useful not to use questions like "what does Gerald have" here. In such a question, the word what is 3 words away from have. We want to impress on the students the proximity of the what, a ring in the sentence here, to the verb. Please also do not make the mistake of describing verbs to the students as doing words. If you do that, you are going to run into serious trouble trying to explain why we consider words such as have, has, am, is, and are to be verbs too. Once the students understand that a ring is the object of the sentence, you can show that the subject, the verb, and the object make up the entire sentence. Now we can start expanding phrases. As you can see, this sentence is almost the same, but we are now adding the adjective expensive to the object phrase. You would stress that this object is now composed of 3 words rather than 2, as in the previous trees. This also tells your learners how to build adjectival phrases. Article plus adjective plus noun. You can build on that in your teaching if you are ever asking them to use more descriptive language in their writing or in their speech. Now we are going to make the same sentence negative to show our students that on the SVO sentence level, a verb can be composed of 2 words, or indeed more if you think of structures such as have been completed or has not finished. Now, doesn't is actually what is called an auxiliary verb, helping verb, as it helps to create negative meaning of present simple tense verbs. I didn't think it would be appropriate or useful to my learners to be teaching them an additional term, but I still wanted them to understand that the big verb is made up of a small verb, auxiliary, and a main verb. That is why I use here lowercase v for the auxiliary verb and uppercase v for the main verbs. It did the trick. The rest of the sentence follows as previously. N is an article. We could draw our learner's attention now to why it was airing before, and now it has become an expensive ring. Once we have completed talking about the lower level, we can show that Gerald is a subject, doesn't have makes up the big verb, and expensive ring is the sentence's object. Let's now look at a completely different sentence. Here, Mr. is a noun and Berling is a noun. Speaks is a verb, of course, but now we also introduce the preposition to. The sheet I gave to my students, the one with examples of the different terms, was very useful here because they were able to refer to their list of prepositions there. Eric is a noun. Again, of use to the students here is the fact that in English prepositions come after a verb but before a noun, and they can clearly see it here. And is a connective and leaves is another verb. The fact that there are 2 verbs here is the point of this sentence. What I wanted for my students to notice and ponder here is why the first part of the sentence, the one before and, does contain a subject, a verb and an object, but the second one, after the connective and, only possesses the verb leaves. Students quickly figure it out. Both speaks and leaves refer to Mr. Berling, thus the subject Mr. Berling is not required to be used twice. As for the object, by this stage students should know that the objects are optional to sentences and do not need to be there. It's very easy to explain this by giving them examples such as the teacher smiled or I laughed. When we get to the entire sentence level, we can link the connective and using a dotted line. And is not part of the SVO structure of sentences, but rather it allows us to create longer compound sentences, much like other connectives such as but, so, as, and or would. We can now show that in this case the entire sentence is actually made of 2 sub-sentences, S1 and S2. For us teachers, these are independent clauses making up a compound sentence here. Of course, if we add the subject in the sentence after the connective and, we could choose to refer to someone else than Mr. Berling. Here, the adjective his and the noun son make up the subject of the clause S2. If you think about it, it's not easy to figure out it's actually an adjective. But possessive adjective it is, as it describes, or in grammar terms, modifies the noun son by providing more information about him. I use this example because in my lesson on Thursday, one of my learners simply proceeded to name his as adjective. Children would normally think of words such as large, good, and beautiful as adjectives. His would not normally be thought of as an adjective, and much less so by EAL learners. But of course, once children get the idea that words preceding nouns tend to describe them, such as in expensive ring, they can visualize this by using sentence trees, and we've done a lot of these, and it becomes a logical assumption to make. Just to let you know, at no point in my lesson did I make use of the term possessive adjective. This girl figured it out entirely on her own. Here we have a sentence where it is the subject that contains an adjective. The sentence starts with the article the and then proceeds to the adjective police and noun inspector. We need to stop here to explain. Whilst yes, technically police is a noun, when it is put before another noun, in our case inspector, it modifies, describes the inspector. Therefore, it takes the function of an adjective. This is something that puzzles a lot of our EAL learners. For instance, in my own mother tongue, Polish, police is policja, but police inspector is inspector policji. Same in Lithuanian, where police is policja, but police inspector is policijus inspektorius. Police as a noun and police as an adjective take different forms. It is useful, therefore, to remind our EAL learners that in English, essentially any noun placed before another noun can take the adjectival function without changing its form. Next, we've got our verb arrives, and now we've got a preposition at, article the, and noun house. Many expressions in the English language take this PAN, preposition, article, noun structure, of course. At the house, in the afternoon, off the bat, off the wall, on the beach, at the front are just a few of the examples. Again, a teachable moment which you can easily draw on later. We can now see how all of these words make up the sentence's subject, verb, and object. I'd also like to show you how sentence trees can be useful to break down the language in subjects across the curriculum. Here's one example from the subject of history, where we can see the use of the passive voice. Look at was ordered, which is made of auxiliary verb was and the past participle ordered. You might notice that to in to pay is not grammatically considered to be a preposition, but rather a participle. This one, lengthier and more complex looking from geography, is another example of how a word normally acting as a noun, storm, when placed in front of another noun, surges, begins acting as an adjective. This is also a great example of how long subjects and objects can be in terms of number of words used for them. Since we can ask the question, storm surges are what? The answer being the greatest threat to life from a tropical storm, we can consider everything after the verb to be the sentence's object. In conclusion, using sentence trees with your learners is a terrific way of breaking the language down for students into manageable, smaller portions, as you have seen by now. One remark needs to be made. We are doing this with young learners in mind. If you are a linguist, you would notice rather quickly that what we do not do here is what's normally done by linguists. In the example here, we took the last 9 words and showed that they are one object. In phrase markers, we would likely have another stage. For instance, a tropical storm would be a noun phrase, but then from a tropical storm, would form a prepositional phrase. That's linguist stuff and far too advanced for our learners. We make things clearer for them without exposing them to a large number of grammatical terminology items. We simply want to use the idea of sentence trees to make the grammar of subjects, verbs and objects, sentences, more accessible to them and usable by our learners. It has a huge potential for teaching the order of sentences, but also the order in phrases. You can show your learners the language patterns such as article, adjective, noun or preposition, article, noun. I hope you find it useful.